Central Park, August 1986. "Kiss me," she said, and pressed her mouth to his. They were kneeling on a patch of grass behind the Metropolitan Museum under a towering elm tree. It was 4:30 in the morning, the sky an inky black with an eerie half-moon ringed by jagged, colorless clouds. The air had the vinegar smell of rotting pears and dying leaves. It was the last 5 minutes of her life. They'd been at Flanagan's until 4. She'd outwaited every other girl hoping to go home with him after his girlfriend stormed out just before midnight. Heather Watts, Alix Mazur, Claudia Ogden, Beth Limbacher. Pretty girls willing to wait for a chance with Gardner Reed, with his movie star cobalt eyes and knife-sharp jaw, thick dark hair that fell messily over his forehead. Gardner Reed, the legend, who'd been kicked out of Hotchkiss for slashing the tires of the headmaster's car, who lit his joints with a Bunsen burner he stole from the York Prep chemistry lab, who'd fingered 2 girls at the same time at a Clash concert, one with his left hand and one with his right. By 3 in the morning, the others had finally grown self-conscious, hanging around for a guy who didn't move from his table in the back of the bar, who hardly looked up, just sat rigid by himself, drinking whiskey and seething. She'd outweighted them all. Since May, she'd been desperate for one momentous, passionate night with him. Validation to take to college, to tell her new friends, and to remind herself Gardner Reed had chosen her. Now, behind the museum, she gripped his shoulders and pulled him tighter. The licorice taste of tequila in her mouth, her brain still skittery from the coke she'd done a couple of hours before. All summer, she'd worked at stamping out her own violent self-consciousness. If she couldn't be a pretty girl, at least not the glossy, golden, blue-eyed, tall, tan pretty so prized on the Upper East Side, she'd at least be a sexy girl. Hair moose wild, black-smeared eyeliner, the tip of her index finger suggestively resting in her mouth. A sexy girl who stayed out till the bars closed down. Her real self might be fearful and desperate to please, easily wounded, prone to cruel self-criticism. But now there was this brazen self she could bring out and dance around like a marionette, who was invulnerable and uncringing, who said anything she wanted, who had said to Gardner as he was leaving Flanagan's, "Wherever you're going, I'm coming with you." It was a humid night, dank air sticky as glue, but the ground where they kneeled was dusty, parched. Chunks of dry soil scoured her bare knees. "Kiss me like you mean it," she slurred, because his mouth was open but his tongue remained immobile, which she took to mean he was losing interest. She was lackluster, uninspiring, not so sexy after all. Her stomach cramped with anxiety. Her head spun and she swayed sideways. To catch her balance, she coiled her arms tight around his neck. Then she kissed him so hard their teeth clacked, until she felt his tongue, finally, in her mouth. The jangle of bracelets sounded to Gardner like rattling chains. In the dead silence of the park, every sound was a blast of noise, the murmur in her throat, his ragged breathing, the rustle of a raccoon through the undergrowth. The branches of the elm tree creaked in the wind. He'd been the one to direct them here, craving open space and the crisp, clean night air. He'd intended to come alone, but she'd insisted, and sex usually worked to take his mind off his shitstorm of a life. Except since the moment they left the bar, he felt like she'd been trying to suffocate him. She jumped onto his back, locking her arms around his neck, her legs pincers around his waist, yelling, "Carry me." He'd had to wrench her hands apart to shake her off. She kept sucking his lip, then biting down on it so hard that it stretched when he yanked back his head. She was drunk. He generally liked girls tipsy. How pliant and unwatchful liquor made them. But the prim part of him was sickened by drunken sloppiness. His girlfriend always switched to club soda at midnight, a decision he'd grudgingly respected. Thinking about his girlfriend, his eyes narrowed to slits. How dare she humiliate him, her infuriating outburst at Flanagan's tonight after she saw him merely talking to another girl, or being talked to by another girl, this one, now clawing so hard through his hair, it was like she was trying to tear it out. His stomach burned, the messy, aggressive mauling of his mouth. He tasted tequila and wanted to retch. He ought to just leave her here, but where else did he have to go? The bars were closed, and he was fed up with wandering the empty streets like an asshole every time his girlfriend got pissed at him. The only other choice was his tiny hot cage of a bedroom, his old childhood bedroom in his mother's apartment on 92nd Street, which he'd had to move back into last spring after his pussy college roommate called the cops on him. His mother in the bedroom next to his, watching him through the wall with her accusing ice-pick eyes. He thrust his hand up the back of her tank top and pinched the little tube of flesh bulging out below the back of her bra. Her face grew hot. Even with the assistance of cocaine, she'd never been able to get as thin as the girls who populated Flanagan's, their ribs poking through their T-shirts and waists the breadth of thread. She subtly tried to squirm away. He held on, rolling the flesh between his fingers. To distract him, she unbuttoned his jeans. The few times she'd gone this far, this was the part she felt most confident about, the unbuttoning and unzipping, the breathless moment when the boy understood you were truly willing to do it, her hand slowly snaking down. Although once the hand got down there, she was never really sure what it was supposed to do. Best to move quickly to the sex itself, which was straightforward and required less skill. She swayed again, trying to tug down his jeans, laughing at her clumsiness. She was still too woozy with lust and margaritas to register his angry eyes or clenched fists. She asked if he had a condom. If she had seen what had happened earlier at Flanagan's, she wasn't thinking about it now. Gardner's girlfriend throwing a packet of condoms at him, shouting, "Use this with her, because you're sure not using it with me tonight." Everyone in the bar whispering to each other behind their hands. Fury banged through him like trapped steam as he thought of how the condom packet had hit him sideways across the cheek, the foil edge slicing a painful scratch. He touched it now, felt droplets of blood still beaded there. "Fucking condoms," he muttered. She heard the contempt in his voice, and her skin prickled with shame. Of course, condoms were prissy, uptight, childish. And then even more childish, she suddenly badly had to pee. She tried to ignore the pressure until she started to worry that once the sex was underway, the motion might cause her bladder to overflow. Imagine her pee sloshing out and soaking his legs. "Don't go anywhere," she said. "I'll be right back," and went stumbling behind the elm tree. He heard the hissing sound of urine hitting dirt. He pictured a dog lifting its leg. He ground his jaw and wedged his fingers in his ears. His knees were burning from kneeling so long. He thought of those film clips they used to watch in social studies class with the blindfolded Vietnamese villagers made to kneel, then shot in the back of the head. "Do you have a tissue?" she called. His silence felt like a rebuke. He was becoming bored with her, distracted. Behind the tree, the park was a swamp of blackness. She would walk back into this empty black world unchanged if she didn't do something extraordinary now to make her mark. She reached under her skirt and pulled off her underwear. It was silky white. It glowed in the dark like a bird. She twirled it on her finger, humming a striptease. He was sitting now, with his legs stretched out before him, leaning back against the tree. He watched her intently, unmoving. She straddled him, the denim of his jeans rough against her thighs. She looked down at him, her eyes at half-mast. His tanned, sinewy arms, the groove above his upper lip. She caught her breath. Heat bloomed between her legs. Still humming, she swung the underwear left and right, and then slowly danced it down to his face. He flinched as it brushed against the cut on his cheek, making it sting. Hadn't she just wiped herself with this underwear? He detected the cloying sweet odor of piss. His skin went hot all over. He knocked her hand away. "Cut it out." She brought the underwear down to his face again. "But feel how soft," she murmured. She was disgusting, rubbing her piss on him, the foul bacteria slithering into the cut, invading his bloodstream. He grabbed her wrist and twisted it until she cried out. "Hey, wait a second," she sputtered, her eyes wide. "I was just playing around." But it was too late. Above him, her head bobbed like a helium balloon. He grabbed it hard, digging in as if to make it burst. "Stupid bitch," he snarled. "I said cut it out." She reared back, but now his hands were around her throat. Bright lights exploded behind his eyes. He squeezed with all his strength. She gasped for air and dug her nails into his arms, drawing blood. Waves of rage blazed through him. He gripped her throat even tighter. Her eyes flooded with terror. She was wheezing now. One last desperate twist of her torso. His fingers were on fire. He heard a crack and felt the bones of her throat give way. Her body went limp. He let go with a grunt and pushed her off of him. He stood and shook out his hands, then zipped up his jeans. "Stupid bitch," he said again. "You couldn't just leave me alone."
Tiptoed in the room. I know you got to have your rest.